Alrighty, so we're starting, these are videos from Module 2 around sort of some content, some questions that I think might come up. I'm just going to suggest and say this as part of this process that a word about discussion forums. When you post to the discussion forums, my job in a lot of ways is to push your thinking, is to ask you questions, is to make you work harder. That doesn't mean that you have done anything wrong. If I ask you to think about something new, something extra, that's not a statement that you did anything wrong or that there's something wrong with what you've done. It's that sociology is hard and we pick it up one step at a time. And when I sort of ask questions, I'm moving you to the next step. I really want you to think about discussion boards as a place where you can be wrong about things and not worry about it. It's one of the reasons they're not graded, actually, so that you have that option to sort of be like, okay, let's just do that piece. Okay. If there really was a significant problem with your post, from my perspective, I would delete it. So for example, if you're saying something offensive or something like deeply problematic, I would probably delete the post and message you. If it's just that you've got an error, I'm not worried about that. I'll tell you that the error exists, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. That can just mean that we have an error here. And if you're making it, chances are really good that other students are doing that too. And so it's one of the reasons why the discussion boards are sort of set up the way they are. So that's my brief spiel about discussion boards in general. Now we're going to talk a little bit about deductive and inductive reasoning and how that sort of shapes research. This is really, really important because most of the experience students have had before they get to Sociology 100 with research comes from their training in sciences. So I remember having to write the odd lab report, sort of talk about like my hypothesis was, and this is what happened. And that is absolutely an appropriate way of doing research, but it is not the only way of doing research. So that lab report, here's my hypothesis, was my hypothesis true or not, is a very deductive sort of structure. So if you're talking about having a hypothesis and then studying to see if it exists, if it is accurate, that's a deductive reasoning post. The position. The other way of looking at it is to sort of say, I'm kind of interested in this. And this is a much more common position in the social sciences, so I'll use a social sciences example. I'm interested in the experiences of people who use drugs. And I sort of want to figure out what's there. So in that sort of space, an inductive approach would be to sort of say, I'm interested in this particular group of people who use drugs, and I'm going to go and talk to them and try to figure out what's happening. And the what's happening part of inductive research is really, really important there because it's not about defining a hypothesis and is this accurate. Instead, it's about this sort of shaping and conversation around I'm not sure what's there, so I'm going to sort of talk to the people who are living it, talk to the people who are engaging with it, and sort of work from that perspective and from that sort of place. Inductive reasoning is not used very often in the physical sciences, so you probably haven't seen it in chemistry and biology, but it does have a big space in the social sciences because a lot of the time using deductive reasoning, it's a really interesting kind of question, right? The questions you ask define the results that you get. So if you go in saying, is divorce bad for children? Chances are really good you're going to get, answers that suggest that that is the case. But if you go in sort of asking, how do children understand their parents' divorces? You're going to wind up with a different kind of conversation just because you're not forcing your answer into sort of good or bad. You're not expressing a preference for one or the other. So that's sort of inductive and deductive reasoning. The rough thing is if you have a hypothesis, if you have an idea of what your result is likely to be, you're probably in a deductive mode. Inductive modes are more about sort of going to the data first and then figuring out sort of what your conclusion is likely to be. The other thing that I want to talk about in this video is the idea of independent and dependent variables. This is probably familiar to at least some of you, but they are distinct and it's important to understand the distinction. So if I'm comparing the test scores of students at a really wealthy school and students at a really poorly resourced school, and I'm comparing their test scores. In that example, my independent variable, i.e. the one that I am changing and the one that I am sort of shifting around, is the wealth of the school, so wealthy or poor in this case. It's a little simplified there, but wealthy or poor in this case. And then the dependent variable is the one that I'm measuring, the one that I'm interested in. So in this case, that would be test scores. And the assumption in that sort of construction of research, the assumption we make when we do that kind of thing, is to say that when we're setting up a study that way, we are expecting that the dependent variable will change based on shifts we make at the independent variable. So, for example, if you think that gender will impact how people feel about their first year sociology class, which it might, then what you're looking at is a conversation about gender being a dependent variable, and then perceptions of the sociology class as sort of your independent variable, the one that you're measuring. I hope that helps. If it doesn't, and if I have not made things clear, throw it up in the help this isn't clear thread, and we'll get to that next.